Right, welcome back to Morning Live. And as promised to Allah before we took a break, we now want to talk about the human rights defenders. And of course, all that right here, I'm joined by Naomi Barasa, an award-winning human rights defender. Of course, you remember she's known well around the world of actually just winning the Sir Henry Brooke Awards for human rights defenders and still stands strong. And we want to talk about so many things affecting Kenyans. And you remember the other day, the government announced that the housing levy will be coming through. So if you're earning more than 100,000, you'll be just a contributor, but not a beneficiary. Below 100,000, hopefully you'll be a beneficiary. But the question begs, what of those people not earning at all? What will really happen? Karibu sana, Naomi.
Asante.
And good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
All right. Now, when you start on this matters housing, because now from your experience and what you've gone to the ground and you've known what is happening, are you confident that indeed we'll get solutions soon?
Let me not sound like a pessimist,
Yeah.
but it's important to say that we need to have very clear frameworks, both legal and strategic, to ensure that this happens. But by and large, it's going to be a tricky thing. It's very complicated. A lot of people who are supposed to contribute are not even very, very convinced they should, because they are not sure that even them, if for example you earn beyond 100, if you're guaranteed of earning a house, and people are like, what is in it for me?
Yeah.
But also the issue you raised, we have a lot of Kenyans who are unemployed, who do not earn at all. And then we have a lot of Kenyans who are in the informal sector, the Juakali sector, that are not necessarily very, very well clarified within an earning bracket. So we need to be very clear. We need to come up with frameworks that will clearly enumerate people and genuinely put them where they belong and provide that need for them, regardless of whether they earn an income or not. In any case, those people who do not earn at all are the ones who are majorly in the slums. A lot of people who are within that contributing bracket are people who are able to like take mortgage, are people who are like have some piece of land and are able to construct, so they live in their own houses.
Absolutely. Now, something else is, as human rights defenders, there's so much that you go through. Indeed, the challenges here and there, sometimes it's also just a matter of, I don't know what happens, but still, you're used to blocks. You see, when you're blocked from moving from point A to point B, trying to push an agenda somewhere, maybe what's the tactic that you guys actually now pull out from this? Because now, for example, when you talk about housing, when you talk about employee rights, when you talk about clean water, when you talk about so many things affecting people, how do you maneuver just to make sure that indeed the survival tactics are also in play here?
Our human rights defenders, as you say, go through a lot. They're personal challenges, but they're also, I would call them collective challenges, where as a sector, people go through particular challenges. But if we were to focus specifically on the personal, they range from just being dismissed to very risky challenges of losing your life, like we know about Kara, who's just lost her life.
Sure.
So human rights defenders go through a lot of this, and there isn't, I wouldn't say that there's a formula, a formula to like keep you away from risks, or rather totally eliminate risks. The formula that I would say is available is a formula to minimize risks, so that you look at what is it that you're venturing into, how prepared are you to deal with hostilities and potential risks, and what capacities do you have to deal with that. So that is the formula you have, but it's basically to just minimize, not reduce. When you look at like collective, there's the issue of, for example, especially the public and the state not recognizing the work of human rights defenders as a very important role in development and peace building, so that sometimes you get people dismissing, you get people not recognizing a contribution. For example, when the negotiations are happening on even housing, people might want to think that this is not their business, the human rights defenders' business. But for sure, if you look at, for example, constitutionalism, when you look at issues to do with public participation, when you look at issues to do with discrimination, when you look at issues to do with accountability and good governance, all these are human rights principles, equality and non-discrimination. So when we're talking even about this bracket that does not earn, not being adequately planned for, you see human rights principles being not adhered to. And so when human rights come in, they're coming in to talk about many other things. And for example, when you talk about transparency and accountability, we're talking about our national resources. We're talking about taxpayers' money. We are saying that this money is given by people. How is it going to be used? How is it going to ensure that we arrive at the expected output, or how do we achieve the goal? But also, we talk about legal frameworks. We have this law. Is it being complied with, or how do we ensure that the state complies with international and national obligations, and even county obligations?
Okay. Now, when you say when diplomacy fails, force is used, sometimes we, early, for example, in this millennium, we used to see human rights activists. For example, the latest one, the common one, by Okiya Omtatah, for example, chaining himself because now he wants to be conspicuously seen that he's fighting something, and back-to-back court cases, human rights activists actually going to court. Sometimes you see releasing piglets in parliament. There's so much happening, and indeed now sometimes, do you think maybe we need to go to an age of diplomacy whereby we don't need to actually now get whipped, don't need to get like maybe frustrated? What do you think about now the solutions to actually now just handle issues? Is it by force that still needs to be done in this country?
I'll tell you that before change happens, there are many strategies, many tactics that are employed. And a lot of times people think that human rights defenders start with the haki yetu tactic. No, I'll tell you that there's a lot of lobbying and advocacy, silent lobbying and advocacy that happens. And human rights defenders are experts in lobbying. And you know, in lobbying, you don't go public. In lobbying, is a persuasive business. So in persuasive business, you don't bring the media, you don't go with guns, you don't, of course we don't use guns, but we don't use placards, for example, in persuasive business. So a lot of people never get to know that this happens a lot. So people go to the streets as a last resort. And it's a constitutional right, and the Constitution of Kenya gives Wanjiku the power to picket their duty bearers, to picket their leaders. So when you see people in the streets, it's usually the last resort. There are a lot of persuasive business that goes into our works before we go to the street. For example, we do a lot of meetings. Closed door meetings with duty bearers. We talk to them. We do writings. We do a lot of fact sheets that share the problem, and we even provide solutions. We do reports, and in the reports we recommend what needs to be done. We subject the affected people to the duty bearers, the relevant duty bearers. So by the time you see people going to the street, it's like a lot has happened and people are being ignored, or nothing is happening. So people take that constitutional right of picketing, because it's also an accepted method of pushing for change.
Now, something else is we've seen the government time and again trying to even just take the license of some human rights bodies away from them, and that means operations also in the country will be kind of minimized, not even minimized, just gotten rid completely. Now, that was fought, and of course things went back to normal. But do you think maybe also the government should be in the forefront, just to make sure that indeed people who are trying to expose these things, people who are trying to actually now make these things open to the public, are taken care of? Yes, it's difficult because now you're keeping them in check. Sometimes you really now put them on the spot, but sometimes it's not always easy for them And do you think maybe it's a high time the government also should bring the human rights defenders closer and even work with them?
Yes, a resolution in the UN created the United Nation Declaration on Human Rights Defenders.
Okay.
This is basically a recognition that the work of human rights contributes a lot to development and peace in the world, so that you are not just going to brush them off, you're not going to wish them away, because they play a major important role. So we see in other countries governments supporting civil society to do their work, including funding civil society groups. Like when you go to the UK, for example, civil society groups receive funding from the government to check them, because they believe that public participation is not just an affair of a few individuals, and people's the public is mainly organized in civil society groups. So if you want people to participate in decision-making processes, in governance and everything, then the easiest way to support them to do it is through civil society groups. In Kenya, it's not reached there. A lot of times, human rights organizations are shut down or licenses revoked.
Absolutely, we've seen that a lot.
Yes, and sometimes it even goes to the extent of freezing their accounts, including individuals' accounts, which is wrong. Number one, it's interfering with people's rights. But number two, it's blocking people from being able to participate. In most cases, it's not factual. Sometimes it's just a way of clipping people's wings, the way of gagging people, just like the media. You have had times when the media, some media stations have been shut down, you're gagged seriously. So it's the same thing, and it's not right. A lot of times there have been claims of organizations not remitting on their taxes or not keeping their books right. But in most cases, it's not factual, then just allegations, and they use that as an opportunity to shut them down. For example, let me tell you, a lot of times when people are talking about accountability, it's not going to be a cup of tea to the state, and especially if there's a lot that needs to be checked. So civil society groups are likely to organize Wanjiku. So it's a way of disabling Wanjiku. It's a way of clipping Wanjiku's wings to you know, to be able to participate. For example, right now, let's just go back to that issue of Big Four agenda housing. It's a fantastic idea that is likely to become chaotic, because, for example, we have all these. They're going to take all the city council neighborhoods and informal settlements for upgrading, I mean, for regeneration and renewal. But yes, but they do not tell us what will happen with security of tenure for these people. They do not tell us. For people, a lot of people in the slum, for example, use these houses as both business and residence, and their residential places. So if I'm using it for both my residential needs and business, in this upcoming project, will I own this house as a home or as a commercial?
That's a big question.
There are many things, but most importantly, a couple of millions are going to be affected across the world. I mean, across the country. We're not being told. Enumeration has been conducted. We know how many people will be affected, and we know that once these new houses are completed, the very people will come back and benefit. So, I mean, there are a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And this would necessitate Wanjikos to ask questions. And if someone doesn't like, then, you know, they probably if they go to the streets.
Now that's the point now I want to come to. Dissatisfaction going to the streets. Now, is there any way you mobilize government officials for a sit-down? Because that's where, how do you do that?
Oh, yes. Let me tell you, for example, there are a couple of communities. One good example I'll use is the Deep Sea community. The Deep Sea community is a community found in High Ridge, North High Ridge, behind Westgate. This community has been there since 1963.
Wow.
They have lived there. It's a small community. It's a 3-acre piece of land, but densely populated with over 12,000 people. Wow. The government under Kenya Roads Urban Authority, Kenya Urban Roads
Authority.
is building a missing link there, 15A. So this community just discovered people taking measurements, and they had never been told anything. So they
Since
went and checked.
1963.
Yes, they went.
Independence.
Yes, so they went
Wow.
and checked. People have been born there, they've lived there, they've married, and they have grandchildren in that community. So and a lot of them do not have a place, any other place they call home, but from this community.
Right.
So Kura wanted to build this road, but did not even consult the people, did not involve the people. So the people went and asked these people who were taking measurements who they are, and they learned it's Kura. And so the Kura wanted them out of the community. They were given a very short notice. Actually, a verbal notice. I wouldn't call that a notice, because a legal notice has its own standards for it to qualify.
The procedures also.
Yes, and it has to be written. So when it's verbal, you can't call it a notice. So they were told in a meeting by the then DC, currently DCC.
DCC. Yeah.
Yes, they were given a very short time to leave, and they were like, where do we go? So they decided to start engaging the DCC, who was very hostile. She always came to meetings with very, very heavily armed police officers. And the minute people wanted to talk, she was like, we are government, we're not going to talk to you, we don't talk. So the people were like, we are Wanjikos in that case. It started before this constitution, but went into this constitution and into this dispensation. So in short, this community tried putting Kura on the table so that they could discuss, and Kura said, no, we are government. So it forced them to start looking for other people who had leverage, and among the people they did was their financial. They looked for European Union. They said, look, we want to talk to you. We want you to understand what it is that we're saying. They looked for civil society organizations that could help them not just talk, but also could help them build the skills to talk, because they wanted to talk and talk well.
Absolutely.
And so we use such, and so this community at the moment has had a long negotiation for the last like 6 years. And we are at a position now, the government has said, okay, yes, we will resettle you, but let's look at the modalities. And so this community has refused totally to like use force. They have been using very persuasive language.
All right. So finally, before you wind up now, do you think there'll be chaotic transition now towards the new housing projects, just quickly?
Well, if they don't do things right, yes. But I'm hoping that they're going to draw a lot of lessons from the different projects that have been there, like the Kenya slum upgrading project of Kibera and others. And from the lessons, they're going to do a good job to avoid the chaos. Otherwise, I promise you, if they don't do a good job, it's going to be chaotic.
All right. Thank you very much, Naomi, for coming to studio, and of course we've learned a lot from your conversation. But let's hope maybe soon we'll be having that round table, amicable conversation, because now I believe when the days of activists going and civil activists actually going to streets, I hope they'll be reduced. Of course, last option it is, but let me hope from your side also, as human rights defenders, you can hope actually.
No, but the negotiations county level, so people are like last 3 weeks, there's been a few discussions with the county on the policy the county is putting across on the urban housing urban renewal on housing, but it also has its own challenges. But let's believe that it's going to go well.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Naomi. And of course, we'll be hoping to see you again, right, in studio. It's a familiar territory now. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for inviting me.